appreciate you all being here today. I'm Geoff Wilson. I think my title these days is Distinguished Fellow and something advisor at the Stimson Center, which is a 501c3 think tank in Washington, D.C. And I focus on issues of nuclear deterrence, the ever-growing military budget, and national security politics, which is unfortunately sort of a growth industry these days. I know that all of us here in Seattle like to joke about traffic, but I especially want to thank Sean and WPSR for inviting me to a place sort of in my front yard, usually to talk to people about nuclear weapons. I had to fly 6 hours across the country. It's really nice to take a short jaunt across the Seattle Bridge for a change. Now look, I've heard a lot about how dire the situation is today here. And I cannot overstate this enough, like the rest of the speakers that you've already heard from, that these issues matter today. And maybe even more so than at any other time in contemporary history. All 9 of the world's nuclear nations across the globe are rapidly modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals. Here at home, the United States is set to spend some $1.7 trillion on new nuclear weapons over 30 years. That's sort of an unquantifiable amount of money. It's really hard to understand what $1 trillion looks like. But $1.7 trillion is just about all of the student debt in this entire country today. If you break it down on a yearly basis over 30 years, we're spending about $75 billion on new nuclear weapons every year, which is the same amount of money as 2 Manhattan projects a year. That's 2 of the 4-year programs to build nuclear weapons in this country in the first place. $75 billion is also the same amount of money that Ronald Reagan spent over the 8 years of his presidency during the last nuclear arms race in totality on nuclear weapons. And we are spending that every year for the next 30 years today. So, at the same time, the unfortunate truth is that the last arms control agreements that are meant to reduce and limit the amount and types of nuclear weapons that are currently deployed expires next year. And every single American needs to be concerned about this issue. Every single person, man, woman, and child is still continuing to live under that nuclear sword of Damocles. And this threat is real, and it is increasingly dangerous. And now, with that last arms control agreement set to expire, we are running the risk of going into a fully unconstrained global nuclear arms race. We need to be very, very concerned about these things. Because if we learned anything from the last arms race, it should have been that merely possessing more nuclear weapons didn't make any of us any more safe. In fact, the truth here is that while we may have continued to live under the implicit threat of nuclear weapons since the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that today we are turning to a place where an explicit threat of nuclear use is becoming more and more commonplace in our politics. We see several nuclear flashpoints across the globe where nuclear powers are fighting non-nuclear powers, where non-state actors are fighting nuclear powers, and where the very real threat of nuclear coercion and threat of nuclear use is becoming increasingly more common. That is a breakdown in the sort of norms and values that people assumed the way that world leaders talked about nuclear weapons in the past. And it's something very, very different and very, very frightening, and it should be something that we're all concerned about. But luckily, as Dr. Heflin was talking about, there is something that we can do about this. In my 14 years working in nuclear weapons issues in Washington, the common refrain from our leaders, from members of Congress, has been, and even Republicans, this used to be a bipartisan issue, is that, I care about this issue and I understand what you're talking about, but I never hear anything from my constituents about it. And unfortunately, in the sort of broken political system that we find ourselves in today, and I've heard this from senators and congressmen alike, the truth is that people, the only thing that they feel that they can be publicly concerned about are parochial issues, things that concern their constituents. So there is a real opportunity here and in this room to make a difference. I firmly believe in that, and I want to thank WPSR and I want to thank all of you for being here today, because you are the forefront of making that difference and helping make this dream a reality. Most importantly, though, now I want to introduce my colleagues, my friends here, who are going to talk to us about some of these nuclear flashpoints across the world, why they matter, and what we can do to help stop the worst from happening. So my fellow panelists, if you would come up here and join me at the front. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Goo Lee, Mr. Bill Dole, Richard Murray here. We're going to go down the line starting from left to right here. What I want you to do is to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your work, and tell us why you think that this particular flashpoint that you are going to cover is necessary for our friends here in order to arm them to be successful advocates on this issue today. Go ahead, Bill. Start us off.
Not sure we're on it.
We just talk.
My feet working. Maybe you can project this. Want to direct? Good
Try
acoustics.
talking into it.
Test. We're on. We're good to
Great,
go.
thank you. Sorry about that. First, thank you for inviting me to be part of this important conversation today. My name is Bill Dole, the Communications Coordinator for the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice. Rachel Corrie was killed in Rafah, in the south end of the Gaza Strip, by Israeli soldiers on March 16, 2003. As an immediate result, Rachel's family started the Rachel Corrie Foundation to continue Rachel's commitment to world peace. Craig and Cindy Corrie, Rachel's parents, continue to operate the foundation. Cindy was asked to be here on this panel today and had to decline. The foundation is celebrating Rachel's birthday this evening with an important discussion with a local medical doctor who has volunteered twice in Gaza over the last year. The foundation aims to create peace through education, art, and through connections to other peace-oriented organizations like Washington Against Nuclear Weapons. The Rachel Corrie Foundation is a member of Washington Against Nuclear Weapons and the local Olympia Coalition to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and has been a partner organization since both started. And I am the active member on both on behalf of the foundation. Because of Rachel's death in Rafah, the foundation has a strong personal connection to Israel and Gaza. The Corries have spent more than a year of their lives in Israel fighting for accountability for Rachel's death. Ultimately, Israel never took responsibility or admitted accountability for Rachel's death, calling her killing a regrettable accident. The United States has never conducted a full investigation into Rachel's death and has failed to pursue accountability for Rachel's killing or the death of several other Americans and foreign nationals killed by Israeli forces. I've been to Israel on the birthright trip, which convinces Jews to go to Israel and live there, and later to Israel and Palestine on a study tour with Americans for Peace Now. I've never been able to enter Gaza. Birthright fails to show me the true Israel, including nuclear weapons in Israel. I also approach this conversation through my own education with a master's degree combining sustainable development and peace studies, including nuclear disarmament and the study of international diplomacy, with a final thesis that suggests disarmament, including nuclear disarmament, is essential to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Now I'm ready to address the flashpoint of nuclear weapons in Israel and Gaza.
Thank you, Bill. Goo, go ahead.
Sorry?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
Yep. Test. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Goo from South Korea. I'm here not as an expert because I'm Korean. That's why I'm here. I'm kind of a member of Seattle Evergreen Coalition, Korean American Progressive Group in the greater Seattle area. So we mainly focused on is the peace in the Korean Peninsula and also democracy. You recently kind of witnessed. And also it's a human rights and then social justice. And then also member of KPNGN. This is Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network for Korea Peace. So we kind of mainly kind of focused on advocacy. One is HR 1841 this year, introduced by Brad Sherman, and also education, and it's a build is a coalition through its kind of its entire nation. So this is kind of I'm working. And a couple of years ago, there's Fukushima, Daiichi's kind of discharges the nuclear waste. So I contacted WPSR, I met Dr. Bergson and also Sean. Since then, I work with them. And then luckily 2023, I had a Korean Hibakusha first visit, and also 25 this year or second visit. Was my first time recognized, actually learned. We had atomic bomb victims in Korea. But it made sense because Korea was colonized at times. So a lot of people forced to live in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So about 10% of victims were Korean. So tomorrow we'll have one of the kind of them's kind of son will be here as keynote speaker. Then I think it's most of you nowadays recognize Korea as some kind of good things, like it's a K-pop, like it's BTS or it's Blackpink, and also K-drama, like it's Squid Games, and movies like it's Parasite, and also food. Tomorrow we'll kind of serve you, kind of simple one though, and also democracy is recently witnessed. But it's kind of even 10, 15 years ago, people recognized Korea as it's not like that. Even my daughter, her kind of experience was, her friends, classmates was second grade, asked her, where are you from? Are you Chinese or Japanese? My daughter answered Korean. Oh, from North Korea? Because that time, most of Americans recognize North Korea as a neighbor, but it's not South Korea. But it's that's a kind of story because now North and South separated. The kind of history is start from kind of colonized by Japan, and then after Second World War by 2 atomic bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then we're supposed to be liberated but divided instead. So North and South. 5 years after, it's the Korean War, 1950. Do you know if the war is ended or not? No, still ongoing. 1953 is armistice signed by the U.S. as representing UN command, and also China and North Korea. Now it's something common for these three countries. All has nuclear weapon. So still kind of is under the war in Korean Peninsula. That's a big thing. And also all kind of nuclear kind of weapons all around the countries. Even recently, Dr. Helfand mentioned South Korea pursued some kind of nuclear weapon. Actually, 1970s, South Korea tried, but actually failed. But so nowadays, a lot of people want to have nuke as kind of deterrence because North Korea has it. But that is a myth, as most of you know. So that's why I think it's very important is Korea-wise flashpoint here, because unending war is one of the longest war in the U.S. Just armistice signed by three countries, but now all of them have nuclear weapon. And also, last year, for example, joint military drills by ROK, South Korea and U.S., more than 200 days of military drill in Korean Peninsula. Before, many focused on this kind of East Coast for this North Korea, but now moved to the West Coast, to China. So there's more threats. And then last year, North Korea had a summit with Russia, and then any countries got kind of threatened or is invaded, they automatically engaged the war. It's all countries have nuclear weapon. This is really kind of danger there. So that's why I'm here to share kind of the current situation in Korean Peninsula. So, and also tomorrow we will have more kind of depth of understanding how is Korean atomic bomb victims kind of suffered. Again, I'm not an expert, so maybe it's the questions or answers maybe kind of awkward, but I tried my best, and then thanks much.
Thank you, Goo. Richard?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Richard. I'm with Bion Seattle, or Bion Washington. Bion is an overseas chapter of Bion. Bion Washington is a chapter of Bion USA, which is an overseas chapter of Bion Philippines. The Bion USA has over 30 member organizations across the U.S. And actually, Bion as a whole, the Philippines has member chapters in Europe, in Australia, Canada, Japan, Hong Kong, everywhere where Filipinos actually have been forced to migrate to. A little bit more about myself, I didn't introduce. So I do a lot of my day-to-day work with Anik Bion Seattle, which is a youth and student organization, and it's part of Bion, which is the alliance of grassroots Filipino organizations that are fighting for national democracy in the Philippines, so a genuinely free and democratic Philippines. Bion was formed in the 70s, really coming out of, if you know Marcos Sr., he declared martial law in the Philippines. It was actually the people, we talked about ordinary people, what power we have. It was the mass movement that Bion helped form that kicked Marcos out. And so we've continued that fight. It continued through the 90s. We were able to kick US bases out briefly before they were returned to the Philippines. We were here in Seattle actually protesting WTO, if you know, Battle of Seattle. And then continued against unfair trade and military agreements through the Trans-Pacific Partnership, RIMPAC, recently APEC, if you remember those protests here in Seattle that happened, and also in California. And then most recently, the 123 nuclear agreement that was signed between the Philippines and the US that basically allows for US-made nuclear technology to be imported into the Philippines. If you're familiar with the Philippines at all, you know there's lots of islands, over 7,000, a really lovely place, so many, it's very lush. I got to go last year for the first time. lots of rich resources. But the catch is that most of those resources aren't being given to the majority of people. It's being pocketed by the ruling class, the Marcoses, the Marcos dynasty, the Dutertes, if you've heard of Duterte, and it's really in partnership with the U.S., who is not only controlling the Philippines economically, but militarily. You may have seen that Pete Hegseth made a trip to the Philippines just recently, March 28th, where he met with Marcos heads of state in the Philippines to strengthen the U.S.'s military upsurge in the Philippines. So they actually signed a joint vision statement where they're going to increase unmanned systems, drones in the Philippines. Many of those may be made by Boeing, so right in our backyard. Ammunition components and energetics. They're going to support in the extraction of Philippine natural minerals that will be used towards defensive systems, technologies. Other things such as 3D printing, AI, we talked about AI earlier. This is really putting the Philippines in the crosshairs of imperialist war between the US's buildup with China. Goo mentioned the military exercises that happen in Korea. That happens in the Philippines as well. It's actually happening this month right now between the Philippines and the US. They've pledged $500 million in US military spending to support the Philippines in its military defense, but we really know it's using the Filipino people for the US's own interests. And so when we talk about flashpoints, we don't have nuclear weapons in the Philippines yet, but through that 1-2-3 nuclear deal, through this military buildup, we're actually seeing the conditions for potential nuclear weapons storage, because what happens when nuclear technology is put in the Philippines in an area where there are typhoons, earthquakes, it's dangerous environmentally, and that can be used for potential US storage of nuclear weapons. So I think I can share more about that as we talk, but thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Peter Lumsdaine, and for the past 7 years, although I'm not an MD or health professional, I have been involved with PSR, both the National Committee for Abolition of Nuclear Weapons and the Washington State Nuclear Weapons Abolition Task Force. But in the larger picture, I have spent most of my adult life working as both a staff person and independent organizer around the challenge of the nuclear arsenals, specifically development of first strike nuclear weapon systems through educational outreach and nonviolent civil resistance organizing. And I'm very fortunate that that has enabled me at times to visit Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Korea, the Philippines, different conflict zones in Latin America, and also to go twice into occupied Iraq, which I think is giving me a perspective on the journey that I took in 2023 with a small delegation of the Zaporizhzhia Protection Project, kind of an informal spin-off of PSR, to Poland and Ukraine. We were in Warsaw, Kyiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Marhanets, Ukraine, very close to the off-limits red zone there at Marhanets, near the front lines. And I think that that is what I'm going to address clearly here on the panel this evening, or this afternoon, that of these different flashpoints that our friends here have talked about, that Ira mentioned in his speech, I think that one of the most very critical and concerning ones is in fact the confrontation between those two powers, which hold over 90% of the world's nuclear arsenals, and that would be Russia and the United States, or the United States as the lead power of NATO. And I think that the 3 points I'm just going to say briefly that kind of came out of that journey through Ukraine, and we talked to many, many different people, a few Russians, mostly Ukrainians. This was all in government-controlled territory. We didn't go into the Russian separatist side. But I think three key points that came out for me is that as tragic and important as this conflict and many conflicts around the world, ones that we hear about, ones that we hear less about in Sudan and so forth, is for the people there on the ground, that there is something much, much larger at stake for the whole planet with, like I say, these two nuclear superpowers, Russia and the United States, or the US with its NATO allies, face-to-face, nose-to-nose in a very perilous confrontation. And I think a second point that I want to just mention is that this legacy of nuclear threats, of threatened nuclear first use by Russia and by the United States in past years and right up to very recent years, for instance, documented in Dan Ellsberg's book, The Doomsday Machine, where he has a whole catalog of US nuclear first use threats that have been made. This is a kind of policy that is right at the spear tip of this concern that we're talking about. But more positively, I think it's very, very important for people to know that in Ukraine, there is a grassroots, widespread Ukrainian semi-underground peace movement there of people who are studying Gandhi, studying Martin Luther King, studying Professor Gene Sharp from Harvard, and have carried out actions of nonviolent civil resistance with some effectiveness in the face of the military forces that are arrayed in Ukraine. So I think that's another point that I think is very important and hopeful. And finally, I will just say that as much as we are concerned about the thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons, the qualitative arms race, which we're seeing how the conflict in Ukraine and other parts of the world is shifting to more and more automated and increasingly autonomous drone systems, AI-driven targeting systems. I mentioned this, Richard mentioned this. This is a very critical point here, and I think that we need to be addressing that qualitative shift as much as the quantitative challenge that we face with the arsenal. So I'm really fortunate to be here on this panel, and I hope that as we answer the questions, we can each share some additional perspectives. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So starting this off, I'm going to pose a couple of questions for the panel here, and then we're going to answer this as sort of a discussion between folks. If anybody wants to jump in and answer one from the top, then others can follow up. And I want to start sort of, I think that it has been made obvious, these represent 4 flashpoints that the United States is intrinsically linked to, right? That we already have security guarantees or agreements with, that we provide a massive amount of military aid to, or that we have sort of de facto extension of the nuclear umbrella to. There are active conflicts in 3 of these zones, as has been pointed out, and a very real escalating trade war in the Western Pacific right now between the United States and China. And anybody that listens to any congressman talk about US nuclear weapons will hear, God, we have to have these because of China. Like this China threat inflation is a very precipitous, sort of Cold War missile gap sort of feeling is the way that people talk about it today. So these are things that are very real and that are sort of right on the horizon right now that we need to be talking about. So first question is, I think sort of the weird thing about nuclear weapons is that often what you say about them means more than what you are actually doing with them. And the threatening the use of nuclear weapons is actually a war crime, according to the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Criminal Justice. But we have seen increasingly dangerous nuclear rhetoric or even outright nuclear coercion over the last decade. And anybody following along at home is probably getting whiplash from a lot of this. In 2021, the United States, Russia, and China all agreed that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought again, only to come back to sort of the realm of fire and fury, the outright threatening of nuclear use by the Russians in their war in Ukraine. So how have such threats made in the conflicts that you are all experts in and are talking about right now? And what sort of response has been made by the world community and international institutions? How are these threats, how is increased nuclear rhetoric affecting people in these crisis zones? Anybody want to start with that? Go ahead, Bill.
Sure, I'll jump in. On November 2023 and again in January 2024, Israel's heritage minister Amichai Eliyahu said Israel should use nuclear weapons against Gaza. Several elected members of the U.S. Congress have suggested a nuclear weapon be used against Palestinians in Gaza over the last 18 months. As for the other part, immediately after Eliyahu said nuclear weapons should be used against Gaza in November 2023, China, Iran, and a multitude of Arab nations meeting at the planned United Nations conference, whose goal was to establish a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East, condemned the statement that a nuclear bomb on Gaza was an option in the Israel-Hamas war, calling it a threat to the world. As for the response from the international law, I can find no evidence that the ICC issued any statement on Israel's threat to use nuclear weapons against Gaza or any other adversary. Although the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, did not directly comment on the threat by Israel to use nuclear weapons in Gaza or anyone else, in the ICJ's 2024 advisory opinion applying international law to the occupied Palestinian territories, the ICJ cited numerous times its own legality of the threat of the use of nuclear weapons advisory opinion from 1996.
Thank you, Bill. Anybody else? How is this affecting people? How is this affecting international communities?
Well, first of all, it's a kind of laws is based on kind of its nature. Like it's a humanitarian law. It's a be good. Kind of it's love each other, help each other. So definitely this is crime, but it's unfortunately nowadays politics kind of measure a lot of things. So even kind of you remember it's 2017, Trump and Kim Jong-un is from North Korea. It's a kind of a button kind of competition. I have bigger buttons or something like that. And the fire and fury. But that's is a kind of small kind of people consider that as just a political gesture or as rhetorics that time. Because at that time North Korea just developing nuclear weapon and testing. But now it's quite different. And then even kind of the issue is the one who controlled this kind of nuclear button is kind of by sole kind of authorities like Trump. But the people vote the leaders based upon their decision, but based on kind of more people is rational, kind of is a more kind of have common sense like us. But in case somebody who is autocratic or is a kind of lunatic, kind of have the power, solely control that, that's more danger. Then it's in kind of is global, in international community, supposed kind of is do something, but unfortunately a lot of things not is done yet. Even kind of UN, a lot of good activities there, but a lot of kind of is financial support from US. That's why kind of is US law is very important. And then maybe kind of different kind of is outside of talk, but I think this the only answer is to how we kind of avoid any crime, prevent it, that's stop it. That is only by people, I think.
I think that's an excellent answer, Goo. Just sort of going off that, the amount of conversations that have been had with members of Congress who believe that there is some sort of two-man system, that President Trump needs to consult with somebody before he launches a nuclear weapon or something like that, that's just flat out wrong, is sort of staggering. And so again, this is an opportunity for education and advocacy from folks who know better and who talk to those members of Congress to do something. I'm sorry. Go, Richard, Peter, you guys want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think so. The Philippines does not have nuclear weapons right now, but this part about the ICC is making me think about Duterte's recent arrest by the ICC. He committed war crimes during his presidency, killing over 30,000 Filipinos during his so-called drug war, which was really a war on the working class in the Philippines. And it was actually the ordinary people, the masses of the Philippines, the international community that was pushing for his arrest. And so I'm kind of just seeing who's actually helping make decisions and push for change in the Philippines right now. It's really the people, and at the same time, who's benefiting from the nuclear technology that's being put into the Philippines. Right now, it's under the control of the US, basically. So it's actually going to benefit large corporations, UltraSafe, who is based here in Seattle, trying to figure out how them being bought out affects things. But yeah, I think there's really big potential for escalation, and I think keep in mind like who's actually benefiting from these large decisions. It's usually those that are in power. But the other side of that is those that have the ability to really make change for the majority are the people in this room, are the people in the Philippines, Filipinos overseas that are part of the same fight. And so hope to share more about that too as we continue our discussion together.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, in terms of nuclear threats, I think there has been a lot of awareness and publicity, obviously, about the fact that the Russian government has indicated, mostly implicitly, that it is a nuclear weapons power and that other Western nations should not intervene in its battle ongoing in Ukraine. I think there's been much less attention, like I said, to the fact that there's a long legacy of maximalist brinkmanship, of nuclear first-use threats, particularly and specifically by the United States over the years. It was NATO policy for decade after decade that if there was a Soviet invasion of Western Europe, the tactical nuclear weapons by France, by England, by the United States were the final arbiter of driving back a conventional loss to Soviet forces. So, I think we have to look at it in the context of that entire ideology of nuclear first-use brinkmanship and maximal demands. One of the things which was brought out, I thought very vividly, by these members of the Ukrainian peace movement that we met with, by Katya and Sergei and Yuri and different people that had conversations with us, was that a great deal of damage has been done to the environment and the people and the communities of Ukraine by the excessive destructive power of Russian military force, and also by the destructive counterforce of NATO-supplied Ukrainian military forces. And this is why, despite the fact that some of these individuals are on trial for treason, despite the fact that they have universally condemned the invasion of Russian troops into their country, but they say very clearly, we are trying to and struggling to make a stand against Russian militarism and Ukrainian NATO militarism, both, that we're caught in the vice between these two forces. So I think that the nuclear threat concern, which is a very, very real and important, has to be viewed in that context of the collision of rival empires, basically rival powers for global and economic dominance in the 21st century, and the use of their arsenals to threaten to enforce that dominance, to win that battle, to win against China, to win against Russia, to win against the United States, when, as Ira pointed out, the fate of the entire human race and the planet is hanging in the balance. So that's the context in which I look at that question of nuclear threats and how that has arisen in Central Europe. I'll just add one other thing here, too, which is what got much less attention, I think, than statements by Putin was a statement by President Biden that if Russian forces were to enter, for instance, any mile, any kilometer, any inch of Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, that they would face the full force and power of the NATO alliance. Now, if you think about that statement for a second, you know that the government of France wields hundreds of thermonuclear weapons. The government of Britain wields hundreds of thermonuclear weapons. And the government of the United States wields thousands and thousands of thermonuclear weapons. So when he says the full force and power of the NATO alliance would be brought to bear against any incursion into Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, again, we have to look at this in a sense of proportion. What is the stake involved here for Europe, for humanity, that they are asserting that full force and power of NATO against?
Thank you, Peter. And I think that these last two comments are especially important right now as we begin to, we don't have a first use policy. I'm sure everybody here is aware of that. But more dangerously now, sort of from a cynical economic perspective, Richard, the United States is starting to build easier to use nuclear weapons again, right? We're starting to build smaller, what were once called tactical nuclear weapons that will be placed on conventional Navy ships, that will go to places like the Philippines, that will be off the coast of China, that will be around the Korean Peninsula, and that will actually either bring more nuclear weapons back to states like Seattle and Atlanta that already host them, for Seattle and Georgia that already host them for the United States Navy, or that may bring them to new states like California, Hawaii, Connecticut, and Virginia. So these issues, and I think Richard's right, from a very cynical perspective, I think it's a boom town to be an arms manufacturer in this country. So I think that those are very important points, which is a nice segue over to our second question here. We're at a place now where the world leaders seem to be attempting to lower the threshold for nuclear use. They are talking about these things in increasingly incendiary ways. They are building more nuclear weapons and more easier to use nuclear weapons. So my question for you all is, how has the role of nuclear weapons in these conflict zones contributed to the erosion of the international taboo against nuclear use? Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I think something I forgot to mention on the last question too is the Philippines has withdrawn from the ICC. So I think that will also affect how the Philippines could potentially be held accountable for any future potential nuclear conflict. But for this question, I'm really thinking about going back to the 123 nuclear deal that basically allows the US to import its own technology into other countries. It's a deal that's done with many other countries, but for the Philippines, it's now furthering the Philippines' dependence on foreign technology and energy. Currently, the Philippines itself allows for 100% foreign ownership of clean energy. And so that actually sets the stage for ultra-safe that I mentioned earlier, or whichever company decides to make a profit off of the Philippines to create these opportunities for potential nuclear technology. Specifically, they've created micro-modular reactors, if you've heard about those. They're basically, if you think of a big nuclear reactor, it's smaller. But that actually means they're putting these in strategic places within the Philippines. This is an untested technology, actually. They're putting them in Metro Manila, an urban city in the Philippines. They're putting it in a fishing community in the Philippines. They're putting it in a rural farmland. And with these new testing sites, of course, that comes with increased militarization. It threatens the livelihood of fisherfolk. There's what do you do with nuclear waste? If there's leaks, that's going to damage the fishing community, the farming community, let alone what happens if it's in the middle of a city. And to the point that there's these small modular reactors, potentially that if they're able to be put in other locations, that's potential storage for or development of US nuclear weapons. And then, yeah, I think just to point out, This is part of one of Biden's campaigns, which is no to ultra safe. We may adjust that as conditions change, which is also part of our U.S. out of the Philippines campaign, because we want the U.S. out militarily, economically, politically, and we really see the interference and insertion of U.S.-made nuclear technology as part of that. We want the ability for the Philippines for the people to choose self-determination, to really choose what we want our resources used towards, and how we meet our energy needs.
Thank you, Richard. Others that want to weigh in? Peter.
Sure. Well, I think, the last question that we addressed is similar in some ways to this about lowering the threshold of inhibition towards threatening the use of nuclear weapons explicitly or implicitly. And as I keep saying, I think there's a long history of this, unfortunately. And part of that, I believe, is the process of demonization of the other, of the adversary, of the enemy. You don't have to be naive or think that Vladimir Putin or Saddam Hussein or Manuel Noriega or the rulers of China or the history of U.S. imperialism is somehow to be dismissed or not taken seriously. To understand that throughout history, back to ancient history and certainly in the 19th and 20th centuries, in World War I and beyond, this key element of mobilizing a nation to make maximalist demands, to mobilize maximum resources, to threaten the maximum destruction of their worst weapons, revolves around the demonization of the other side. And we certainly saw this, I think, in Iraq. Whatever one thinks of large powers invading smaller countries, be it Russia and Ukraine or the United States in Iraq, be it in Afghanistan or Lebanon or Gaza or wherever those occurrences have happened, Tibet, over the years and decades, that has to be understood again in the context of finding a way out of that polarization. John Kennedy said this at American University in the summer of 1963, the halfway point between the Cuban Missile Crisis and his assassination in Dallas, Texas, that in the nuclear era, when an adversary, a global adversary, is given only the option of humiliating retreat or unlimited escalation, this becomes not a policy at all. It becomes a kind of form of sophisticated insanity for the people of the planet. That's what John Kennedy said at American University, paraphrasing. So I think that is the context in which the lowering of nuclear inhibitions and the raising of nuclear threats has to be looked at, that we've got to break out of that mode of demonization and polarization and maximal demands. And the authors of this article, Why Are We in Ukraine, in Harper's, mention that what used to be the crown jewel of diplomacy and often interpersonal conflicts has now become a dirty word, and that word is compromise.
Well said, Peter. Anybody else want to weigh in on this question before we move on?
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to say, first of all, that we know that Israel uses plausible deniability, saying that they neither have nor do not have nuclear weapons. But I've mentioned that they have made statements that they confirm that they have nuclear weapons, and that this information has made through Israel's literary censor in Ari Shavit's 2013 book, My Promised Land, which is a personal story that he tells of his family helping develop the nuclear weapons in Israel. We know that Israel has threatened to use nuclear weapons since, in war and conflicts since Golda Meir in 1973 and possibly before. You may know Professor John Mersheimer, who wrote about the Israel lobby. And he said that he and other people have suggested that Israel has no intention of using a nuclear weapon in Gaza or in against Hezbollah in Lebanon because of the proximity to Israel. But he says that there's no guarantee that a country that has nuclear weapons won't use them. I know that we were intending to engage in discussion around nuclear weapons in Iran in this panel as well. And nuclear weapons in Iran, or whether they have or do not have them, has a lot to do with Israel. And Mersheimer says that even without nuclear weapons, Israel would be an adversary. There'd be a lot of animosity and conflict between those two countries. You've talked a lot about resources. Mersheimer, in a webinar that hosted last month that he was on, talking to the University of Chicago, said that the Middle East is not about that the Middle East is mainly about oil, and there's three areas of the world that we care about. Europe, which we no longer care about, the Middle East because of oil, and China just because. So, as far as nuclear weapons in the Middle East, Iran is an issue, although everybody thinks they stopped pursuing them after 2003.
This is a good opportunity, Bill. I've been giving the flag here that it's time to start wrapping up. So I appreciate that because I think that's a great segue into the final question that I want to give Goo the opportunity to answer first here. Bring this back to optimism. Where is there a chance for us to make real progress, nonviolent progress for success in this issue? So do you all see a pathway for diplomacy to resolve these conflicts or these nuclear potentials today? And how might it affect or open a road to direct diplomacy between nuclear states going forward?
A great question. So diplomacy. Yes, definitely we need diplomacy. When I was young, diplomacy was, now I consider true diplomacy. Kind of open the table, negotiate more towards common goods. But nowadays, we more focused on individuals or countries, groups' interest. So how we kind of negotiate on the table. So the thing is, kind of is before the question, the previous questions together, it's definitely kind of is eroded for kind of international taboo on nuclear weapon usage and everything. Definitely it's kind of risk is increase the risk, but good thing is kind of is people start work, not just lean on politicians. So kind of that's why we start to talk and dialogue based on kind of grassroots and kind of negotiation. Not the part is diplomacy, but kind of we aware of that. So this is part of that I may kind of answer. In Korean, maybe a couple of you may read. This is a 반전 반핵, is a kind of anti-war and anti-nuke. This is the real diplomacy we can provide, and then bring to kind of our table here. So that's why we are here as a people. We make a proposal to kind of deliver to kind of politicians, make a better deal, real kind of diplomacy, true diplomacy we need. Thank you.
Outstanding. Anybody else want to weigh in? Pathways for diplomacy in 1 minute or less.
Yeah, I think definitely want diplomacy and agree with Goo that the most effective diplomacy right now is actually diplomacy in the streets. So how can we as people really galvanize our communities? It was, for Bayan in the Philippines, it was multiple sectors of society, churches, teachers, scientists, doctors, physicians, artists, farmers, fisherfolk that really pushed for the ousting of Marcos. We kicked the US out in the 90s. We kicked Spain out in our history long ago. We fought against Japan. And now we're currently fighting against the US. So I think it's really important what Goo was saying is it's this coalition, it's how do we bring this out back to our communities to really hold those in power accountable, and but really the power is amongst ourselves, the majority of people.
Well, I really want to echo what has been said in that I think that grassroots civilian diplomacy is really critical. And this is one thing I think that's extraordinary about International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985, PSR's international affiliate, was that at a time of profound ideological division, really greater in some ways than there is now, two entirely different systems in Soviet Russia and the United States, that Soviet physicians and American physicians and others as well, but from those two polarized ideological armed camps came together with a united presence and a united statement, and that's why I think they won the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. So that's an example of how people can reach out against over that polarization and demonization. I want to recommend also on the subject of diplomacy and hope this article, cover story in Harper's Magazine in the summer of 2023, Why Are We in Ukraine? On the Dangers of American Hubris by two eminent scholars. Very, very important article that goes way beyond Ukraine itself, dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, the development of first strike weapons. It's a really, really good article. It's available online and also at your local library, so I'd recommend that. And the final thing I would say is that in terms of this civilian grassroots diplomacy, that is directly connected to civilian nonviolent direct action, which we heard amazing testimonies about in Ukraine, of Ukrainian people who stood up to military forces and backed them down in Enerhodar and other parts of Ukraine. Philippe Daza, a academic from Spain, has documented 230 cases of civilian resistance to military force in the Ukrainian war zone, in many cases successful, at least to some degree. So I think if we are going to rebuild that movement that we've talked about in the 1980s, a crucial component of that has got to be mobilizing large-scale nonviolent civil resistance around nuclear weapons facilities and first strike development centers, just like happened in the 1980s at the Nevada test site, at Livermore, at Vandenberg, at Groton, all over the country. We really need to make that front and center in the work that we do.
Well said. Just in closing here, in the final 30 seconds, if members of Congress say that this needs to be a parochial issue, nobody should understand how much nuclear weapons are a parochial issue than Washingtonians. If Washington State was to secede from the Union tomorrow, it would be the third largest nuclear power in the world. The bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were made here in this state. The weapons were refined here. And we have a large gathering of some of the largest defense industrial companies in the world here at home. So if people want to make this an issue, if only politics is parochial, you are the folks that can make it happen. I want to thank all of our panelists today for telling us why this is so important. Please give them your applause.
Thanks, Pat.